As a quick review, we're covering the latest memorandum from Bland Richter, attorneys for Gloria Satterfield's sons, that's in opposition to Alex's motion for relief from judgment based on Rule 60B. Last time we focused on Alex's new story that he lied about the dogs tripping Gloria. We covered the testimony from Alex, Maggie, and Paul taken shortly after the accident. This time, we're moving on to arguments against Team Murdoch's attempts to weasel out of that confession. We're also going to cover the details of Gloria's injuries from the insurance report. They are quite extreme, so I want to issue a trigger warning in advance. Welcome back. I'm Cassidy O'Connell, and this is Murdoch Money, The Victims. On this season of The Other 55%, the trial that consumed the entire true crime community and beyond, the Alex Murdaugh trial.
And I could see his brain on
generating millions of dollars in fees. That was not enough for you.
I know you have to see Paul and Maggie during the night times when you're attempting to go to sleep. I'm sure they come and visit you.
All these people on these two exhibits, these were real people that needed this money, is that correct?
I'm sure they did.
Somebody going to check him?
Yes, sir. They've already checked them.
They did check him?
Yes, sir.
That's official that they're dead?
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
Oh, and it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become.
You've heard the number of indictments. Now let's go beyond the numbers and get to know the victims in Murdoch Money. It's The Other 55% with Cassidy O'Connell, because we don't know the half of it, and this time we probably never will. Alex says he admitted liability for Gloria's accidental death by saying it was the dogs that made her fall. He represented this fact before 3 courts. When charges came against him, he changed his tune and now says dogs were not involved and he made that up, and is trying to push it through legally by applying this Rule 60B, and this memorandum is pointing out all the reasons why he should not be allowed to do so. So far, we've covered that 1. None of the documents list the dog as the reason for the accidents. 2. Maggie's testimony states the dogs were in fact present for the fall. And 3. Paul's testimony corroborates this as well. If you missed last episode, be sure to go back and watch that, as it contains their testimony and a lot of details from that day. So, if as pointed out in the last video, the documents are not centered on the dogs as the reason for the fall, what reason did the insurance companies pay out such a high amount? That's what we're going to focus on today. Jumping back into the exhibit we were reviewing, Exhibit D, we're going to find that out. So venue plays a most important role here. We're talking about counties known to be plaintiff-friendly within the 14th Circuit, presided over by names you'll recognize: Judge Perry Buckner and Judge Carmen Mullen. Judge Buckner we know from the Hakeem Pinckney case, and Judge Mullen we know both from her allowing Alex to hide his winning by illegally not filing court documents, and also from appointing Russell Lafitte as personal representative of Donna Badger's estate instead of her husband, Arthur, from a previous episode. We also have seen fraudulent disbursement sheets with numbers that don't add up and make no sense, yet she quickly signed off on them. This area has a reputation they knew they didn't stand a chance in. We see that in the communication here, picking up where we left off. Notice some of the things I've highlighted here. Venue of any filed lawsuit is a key issue. It may be filed in Colleton County or in Hampton County. Both of these counties sit within the 14th Judicial Circuit in South Carolina. The 14th Judicial Circuit is known to be a plaintiff-friendly circuit. Hampton County is among the most pro-plaintiff trial venues in South Carolina, largely because of the influence of Mr. Murdoch's law firm in pursuing cases there. I tend to think Mr. Murdoch would be favorably viewed by a jury in Hampton County or in Colleton County. The 14th Circuit has 2 resident judges, Judge Perry Buckner and Judge Carmen Mullen. These judges know Mr. Murdoch and Mr. Fleming well. Now, this is read directly from the insurance report when they were trying to determine a settlement amount. Next, he lays out the amounts expected for this claim and breaks them down accordingly. We see here he says that the damages expected to be claimed are extensive. We know that Gloria spent a few weeks in the hospital in intensive care. She had surgery, she had multiple procedures, she had a lot of damage to her body. So the medical treatment charges would be almost $700,000, and we know that they were. I think it was something like $630,000 or $650,000. So this is a very close estimate. So adding these claim damages and survival claim would be estimated at $1 million. Then we go on to the wrongful death portion. Then Tony, for his grief and loss of association, would be about $1 million. Brian is the one who's special needs, so he would receive even more for his grief and loss of association, but also for partial financial support, which we know Gloria was providing for him at the time of her death. So his portion would be expected to be $1,300,000. So the total damages, this is a quick estimate, would be $3.3 million. We know the final amount came in a little higher than that, but we can see the math behind the settlement amount. Back to page 8 of the memorandum, it summarizes what has been proven so far, that Team Murdoch is attempting to mislead the court by saying that the reason Nautilus approved the settlement was due to his previous misleading statements. It's almost a tongue twister at this point, with Team Satterfield saying Alex is now lying about lying before. But the facts portrayed here in the in-house communications with the insurance company, we read that it's not just the basis of the dogs as a reason for the settlement, and the dogs are not even mentioned in the basic 3 court documents. Last video, we introduced the doctrine of judicial estoppel. Remember, there were 3 criteria needed to apply it. The second of which was whether the party has succeeded in persuading a court to accept that party's earlier positions, that the judicial acceptance of an inconsistent position in a later proceeding would create the perception that either the first or the second court was misled. There's a clear record of Alex persuading the court in this matter. Let's look at 2 examples. In a bond reduction hearing before Judge Allison Lee on January 18, 2022, during this hearing, Team Murdoch informed the court that the disputes between Alex and the Satterfields had been resolved and that Alex would be signing the confession. This confession that he's now taking back. Unfortunately for Alex, his bond was not lowered, and it's hinted that that's a possible reason that he wants to take it back, that this confession may have only been put in place in order to get a lower bond. To me, it shows that this eternal opportunist uses whatever story he thinks will help him in whatever moment he is currently in, and his stories are as flexible as his circumstances. On to the second court matter, let's look at the federal case just last month in the case of Nautilus seeking to recover the $3.8 million it paid that was supposed to go to the Satterfields, but instead went to Alex, Corey, and Chad. Nautilus had pointed to his proposed confession of judgment made on March 24, 2022. So we see that reference to that motion here, and then it goes on to say that Murdoch filed his answer to the amended complaint admitting the above allegation, thus stipulating to the validity of the confession. Murdoch did not take the position that the confession was a nullity in the federal action. So in other words, this confession of judgment has come up in other situations in which it has not been denied, even this one not so long ago for the federal case. Because Alex replied on May 1st, 2023, admitting the allegation, and he never said it wasn't true. So basically this highlights that when it served Alex's purpose to show contrition, he paraded the confession, but when faced with the results of said confession, for example, paying the money back, he now disavows the confession. You can't have it both ways. Next, we have several pages and exhibits dedicated to this so-called bigger fish to fry quote from Team Murdoch's motion, which alludes to Team Murdoch being so busy with other more pressing matters like a murder trial. They prepare a very detailed timeline to show what Team Murdoch was actually busy with, and we see that the biggest fish at the time was actually setting up this confession. The exhibits show ongoing conversation about it in the form of a lengthy email exchange and bond hearings that show this confession, which conversation on had begun December 7th, 2021, was wrapping up in May 2022. So we're talking about half a year here. Just glancing at the bottom of this timeline, May 12th, 2022, Judge Hall approved the order permitting Alex Murdaugh to enter into the confession with the Satterfields. May 31st, the approved $4.3 million confession was filed with the clerk's office. July 12th, Alex Murdaugh was disbarred after the South Carolina Supreme Court received a copy of the filed confession. Now, about these claims that they were busy with a murder trial, when did these murder charges take effect? July 14th, 2022. Alex Murdaugh is indicted on 2 counts of murder for the killing of his wife and son. So, conversations about this confession of judgment started in December, completed in May. Alex wasn't charged with murder until July. So this timeline clearly shows he was not busy with a murder trial. So busy that he missed some important information. So in my opinion, this is another win for Team Satterfield. Excellent documentation of proof that this confession was not sudden or sneaky. It was months in the making and over before any murder charges came to be. I'll skim through the next part, but there are multiple citations establishing that attorney error, if that's what they're trying to squeeze in here as well, is also not a reason for Rule 60B. Next, we're shown some important wording, the confession that was approved by and signed into court. Look at these points I've highlighted. Debtor admits liability to the judgment creditors for the claims asserted against him. Legally binding and enforceable. He will not contest its validity or enforcement. He will not challenge or contest in any way his capacity or authority to enter and execute this confession. It's given freely under his own volition without duress or coercion. We're also not talking about Joe Schmo off the street who's unfamiliar with legal documents and may have been asked to sign something that he didn't understand. We saw Alex at the trial with his bag of files, whispering with his lawyers during testimony, writing things down, and are quite aware that he was not sitting passively by while his lawyers called all the shots. We know he was fully aware of the meaning of any documents he signed, and perhaps had a hand in their writing. This is ironclad documentation. So when he signed this confession and said that this was binding, enforceable, he would not contest or challenge it in any way, he knew at that time what that meant, and he knows now. Now, if you remember the video I did that's covering this motion by Team Murdaugh that's being addressed here, you'll remember that on page 1, Team Murdaugh started off mentioning his debilitating opioid addiction as some kind of tired excuse. So that's addressed here. It says Murdaugh was arrested in September 2021 and released on September 16, 2021, at which time he went directly to a drug detox center in Florida. He remained in a detox center until October 14, 2021, at which time he was remanded into the custody of the great state of South Carolina, where he has remained ever since. So after detoxing from September 16th till October 14th, and then being in custody, where presumably he would have no access to this great opioid addiction that he has claimed to have, he was sober when talks of this confession started to take place in December. Also, 5 months before he gave this confessed judgment, he appeared before Judge Lee. He told Judge Lee on video that his head had never been clearer and that he is off of drugs, is exercising, and healthy. So any claims to a so-called opioid addiction being in the way of him making a clear decision are moot. Alex was both sober and aware when he signed and submitted his confession. No excuses. Page 23 addresses the claims that this suit is somehow unfair to other victims, as if Team Murdaugh cares about Alex's victims. But anyway, saying that if the confessed judgment remains in place, the other victims will have their restitution substantially reduced. And defending the position that Team Satterfield has not attempted to take money away from other victims, points out to some specific examples. But let me read what he says here. The Satterfields were the first financial victims of Alex to sue him. As such, they were first in line. As it relates to judgments, first in time is first in right. But the Satterfields agreed to give up their priority and to join any future creditors or judgment holders on equal footing. Now, is this simply words? No, they have lived up to it. On 3 separate occasions, the Satterfields have executed partial releases to allow for the sale of assets. They are not holding onto everything for themselves. We see this in Exhibit N, O, and P. And these releases were well known to Team Murdoch, even as they typed up this motion, making their argument not only ridiculous, but a waste of everyone's time and resources. But the bottom of page 24 brings up a good point, since Team Murdoch is now claiming to be so concerned that this settlement is taking money from the other victims' hands. Bland Richter point to Team Murdoch's own actions. After the Gloria Satterfield lawsuit was claimed on September 15, 2021, the very next month, on October 28, 2021, Alex's brother Randy sued Alex for $46,500. The very next day, Alex filed a confession of judgment for $90,000. On the same day, Alex's former law firm sues Alex for $477,000. And 4 days later, Alex signs a confession of judgment, and it's filed. So, where was the concern for the victims here? Was this not a hurried jump to the front of the line for Randy and for the law firm once they realized that the victims were starting to sue? Alex's brother Randy, who worked at the same law firm, and this law firm that sat there for years while Alex stole from people in piteous circumstances, and they took no note. And now, when they realize the victims are coming for money, they jump in front, and Alex makes sure to sign those confessions of judgment the very next day or 4 days later, to be sure that his brother Randy and his ex-law firm get their money first while there's still money to be gotten. We now jump to complaints about Eric Bland calling him bad names on social media. But then on page 27 we find a most important point. Team Murdoch has suggested that since the Satterfields brought about a successful suit against some of the members involved in the theft of their settlement money, that they should be held as defendants by Nautilus Insurance. This is an outrageous claim, especially since the Satterfields never got a penny of the money from Nautilus. As stated here, none of the money recovered by the Satterfield is Nautilus money, nor is Nautilus beneficially entitled to it. What the motion advances is the theory that Murdoch and the beneficiaries of the stolen money should be able to retain the money because the Satterfields were successful in suing them and recovering from other sources. It's crazy. Not to mention, Nautilus has never tried to hold the Satterfield boys accountable. Again, a fail. The memorandum goes on to point out that Alex seems to think if he takes back the claim that the dogs caused the fall, he can rewind everything back and create a do-over. This case is no longer about what caused Gloria's fall. All that needs proven is that Alex stole the Satterfield's money, a fact which is irrefutably documented. Even if it were a matter of proving what caused Gloria's fall, the evidence now has been completely spoiled. The witnesses of Gloria's conditions after the fall are now dead by Alex's own hand. Just like the title of one of my previous videos, they're all dead. We'll never know the truth. Finally, we get to page 29, where Team Satterfield says, "Enough is enough. Alex must stop victimizing the victims and weaponizing the legal system." I'd like to read the final 2 paragraphs because I just think they are wonderfully and beautifully written. Respectfully, no reasonable attorney who spent 6 months negotiating the settlement of a case that involved a confession of judgment, who then petitioned a court to accept the settlement and to permit the execution of the confession, and then use the confession in other judicial proceedings, would wait until the eve of the 1-year anniversary of the confession and point to phantom defects as a means to avoid it. Likewise, no reasonable attorney would misrepresent to a court the reason the confession was executed in the first place was because they had bigger fish to fry and were not paying close enough attention to detail when the fish they were referencing, for example the murder indictments, did not even exist. at the time of the confession. In the discharge of our Rule 11 obligation to consult, requests were made of Team Murdoch to withdraw the present motion in order to avoid the time and expense of this reply. These requests were unsuccessful, as shown through the attached email chain. So what these exhibits show is that all of these arguments made here in this memorandum, Bland Richter sent to Team Murdoch and said, hey, this is a waste of the court's time. And they opted to continue to go on ahead and waste the court's time. The Satterfield boys have had enough of Alex Murdoch. Their mother died at his home. From what is known now, it appears that by the time of their mother's funeral, Alex had already concocted a plan to monetize her death to his benefit. Alex lied to them. Alex stole from them. Even now, as they try to put back the pieces of a once quiet and happy life, Alex Murdoch is literally the hand from the grave that will not allow them peace. We pray to the court that a sanction will issue against Team Murdoch that will finally shake his grip. Respectfully, anything short of a sanction will serve to sanction his conduct. Bravo! Beautifully written. I cannot wait to see the ruling on all of this. Now, wrapping up, I wanted to get to the point about Gloria's injuries back in Exhibit D. Exhibit D was, remember, the in-house communication from the legal team to the insurance company. Now, I realize Gloria's age comes into play with a fall like this, and also the stairs are brick and therefore very sharp and hard, but these injuries really seem extreme. Now, I'm no medical expert and certainly not an accident specialist, nor do I claim to have any insight into the possibilities of what might have happened to Gloria that day, but I want to share the medical evidence from this insurance document for you to decipher how you will. I'm just going to read aloud from it. In the fall, she sustained a right-sided head laceration, a right-sided subdural hematoma. Now I've included a definition of a subdural hematoma. It is a clot of blood that develops between the surface of the brain and the brain's tough outer covering, usually due to stretching and tearing of veins on the brain's surface. These veins rupture when a head injury suddenly jolts or shakes the brain. Traumatic acute subdural hematomas are among the most lethal of all head injuries, associated with more severe generalized brain injury. They are seen in 10% to 20% of all traumatic brain injury cases and occur in up to 30% of fatal injuries. So this is the first injury that was potentially fatal. Back to the report. Multiple left side posterior rib fractures. So she had broken ribs, a partially collapsed lung, and a pulmonary contusion. Now, a pulmonary contusion, I've included that here too. It's an injury to the lung parenchyma in the absence of a laceration to lung tissue or any vascular structures. It usually results from blunt chest trauma, shock waves associated with penetrating chest injury or explosion injuries. These injuries can lead to pulmonary failure and death. So again, the second of her injuries, which is potentially fatal. Her Glasgow Coma score per care flight was 14, which is abnormal and suggests a head injury. 15 is normal. As you may know, a traumatic brain injury can cause amnesia of the pre-incident activity and some post-incident activity. And if you'll remember, she couldn't remember how she fell. She also thought the current president of the United States was Bill Clinton. So it does show some amnesia or something that was affecting her thinking ability. Then he goes on, whenever older ladies have a fall, I'm curious about their serum sodium level. Satterfield's level was 136 as charted by CareFlight, which is the very bottom of the normal range. Her serum sodium level at Trident Hospital was 135. It's unclear whether IVs administered by the EMS would have affected that reading. But then they go on to say it conceivably could have been a cause of Satterfield's fall. I think probably not, because it was in the bottom of the normal range, but they're considering all possibilities here. At Trident Hospital, she had surgery to repair her broken ribs and to reconstruct her chest wall, and to remove significant blood in her chest cavity. The subdural hematoma was evaluated and determined to not be operable. Doctors also suspected, but never located, a bowel perforation. She developed a pleural effusion and already had the partially collapsed left lung. Now I've also included pleural effusion. Sometimes it's referred to as water on the lungs. It's a buildup of excess fluid between the layers of the pleura. And we can see a picture of that here. It could be fluid, it could be blood. She had bilateral chest drains, so they were addressing this pleural effusion. But this is another potentially fatal situation that she was in. There is charting by radiology to the effect that at one point her endotracheal tube was positioned too far in, and that an arterial line was in the wrong place, both of which eventually were rectified. Basically, she had several severe injuries being managed, which together created a greater risk of a downward decline. After a few days, she was moved out of the ICU. She appeared by nurse observation to be doing better. Then she declined and was returned to the ICU and eventually placed on a ventilator. She developed a pneumonia of unknown origin. Although doctors were aware of sinusitis, they never diagnosed the source of the pneumonia. She developed fluid in her lungs and had a heart attack encoded. She appears to have sustained a anoxic brain injury and went into a deep coma. Her brain activity was evaluated by EEG, and the family was told she had a very slim chance of ever waking up. She removed from life support at request of the family, was moved to hospice briefly, and died. It appears that her right-sided subdural hematoma never subsided or cleared, and she continued to have some amount of midline shift in her brain the entire course. So poor Gloria had several emergency situations happening in her body all at the same time. A few of those could have been fatal on their own, but putting them all together was just a deadly combination that most people could not have survived. When the pneumonia set in, it was basically her death sentence. When the heart attack left her with anoxic brain injury, she was already gone at that point. How Alex found it in his evil heart to capitalize on the death of a faithful housekeeper he'd known for 2 decades will remain beyond my grasp. How he found it in his evil heart to steal her estate from her 2 grieving orphan sons is equally beyond my grasp. How he finds it in his evil heart to continue to not only fight his consequences for this theft, but also to try to throw Brian and Tony in front of himself to take the fire that he drew, and that there are people fighting for him to help him do this, almost makes one lose faith in humanity. I'm just so grateful that this story has been brought to the world stage instead of being hushed in a small judicial district built on connections and corruption, that maybe, with the whole world looking on, this broken system will no longer be allowed to operate in inequity and darkness. May Gloria and all of the other victims finally get their justice.